So everybody, thanks so much for listening. If you're a first timer, and you're listening to us on one of the podcasting sites, we'll start off there. Please subscribe, share, and like this, and send it to your friends and your family members. If you're listening to us on one of the radio stations local around the country, we appreciate that. And also tell your friends and your family to listen. We're trying to get this around to as many people as possible, and we do have a lot of new listeners, and I'm very thankful for that. We do have a special guest on, Dr. David Bernstein, here on Fire Breathing Rob. His website is davidbernsteinmd.com. He's got a couple of books on there. And before we even start the interview, we'll go into that in just a second. And you can go to his website and buy the books. It's The Power of Five. And the other book is I've Got Some Good News and Some Bad News, You're Old. You can get both of those books for $28, so it's a pretty good deal. And you can also go on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles. But I do want to give pub to the website because there's a lot of good information there. But Doc, thanks so much for your time and coming on here. We got a lot of topics to speak about today.
Thanks, Rob. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
All right. Well, that was a mouthful, so we'll shorten it up now since we got that out of the way. But can you tell the viewers a little bit about yourself? I mean, we just know that you're a doctor, but talk about why you got into medicine and the people that you're helping throughout your medical career.
Oh, I'd be glad to. And I love to talk about it. I love to talk, period. I grew up on Long Island, New York, and I was the son of an immigrant and a combat wounded World War II veteran. And I was encouraged by my parents to become a professional, like a doctor. They wanted a doctor in the family. And in addition to that, as I was growing up, and I saw the frustration my mother had in the healthcare delivered to her parents, who happened to be my grandparents. And in their later life, she would complain that her doctors didn't know much about taking care of old people and didn't seem to care very much. And she had me promise that if I ever become a doctor, I wasn't going to be like that. Mm-hmm. And around the time I was interviewing for colleges, I saw a National Geographic magazine. I think it was January 1973. And on the cover was an older gentleman with a kind of a long beard. And the story was written about centenarians. I hardly could pronounce the word back then. And those are people who lived to be 100. And I read it. It was pretty much 50 years before National Geographic went back and wrote about the blue zones. And these were areas in the world where people lived to be 100. And it was totally fascinating to me. So I went to college in St. Louis, Missouri at Washington University. Mm-hmm. I took some gerontology courses. I took some courses in psychology and biology and neurobiology in particular, and did some research. Went to medical school and did my internship and residency in South Florida, here in the Tampa Bay area. Hung up my shingle and practiced geriatric medicine for 40 years. Wow. I loved it. And there was something else that happened in my life. At my high school graduation, the commencement speaker who had graduated from our high school 10 years earlier became an author. And I said, I'm going to write a book one day. A lot of doctors say that, and some do, and we all think we have these great stories in us about all the things that we encountered. Usually they're funny, crazy stories. And I started writing my book, I've Got Some Good News and Some Bad News, You're Old. And it turned out that I tried to incorporate funny stories, but they working with older adults was one of those things that really enlightened me about the aging process and how people handled it and did it successfully. So that's where I am.
So let's talk about both books, and we'll go one at a time. So I've Got Some Good News and Bad News, You're Old. Let's talk about that first, because you did study that obviously your whole life. You've been working with people that are elderly your whole life. What are we seeing with the older generations as far as health-wise?
Well, it was really interesting. I had been asked to speak at a few events, and I always arrived beforehand. And as people came in, I would warm up the audience and talk to who was coming in. And during the course of my presentation, I'd ask for audience participation and asked people what their secrets of success were. And I did the same thing in my office as a doctor, which was amazing because when you think about it, it was a one-on-one discussion. And once I got their medical concerns out of the way, I was able to inquire about what provoked their long, happy lives. And what I discovered there were 5 recurring themes, and there were 5 elements, so to speak, of the things that led to a happy, healthy, long life. And I played around with it and ultimately came up with the concept that people can only remember 5 things at a time. So I narrowed it down to 5 elements, 5 things that consistently came up. And then I came up with an acronym, GRACE, GRACE. So people can remember that. And these are the things that I discovered sort of retrospectively, what people had done in their lives that provoked this life. And let me go through each of those letters of grace for you, because that's most of what I've got some good news and some bad news are old is about. It's Tales of a Geriatrician, what I learned. So the first G stands for goals. And what I discovered was people who had goals in life, people who had a purpose, had more fulfilling lives. And an example of that would have been a gentleman who retired from the real estate business in New York and moved to Florida and took a job at a historic museum in Clearwater. And what a great thing it was for him to get up every morning and drive down, see a sunrise and a sunset when he came home. And he developed camaraderie with younger people. He found a purpose to his life by being that security person who would be able to detect things that were going on among the guests in the hotel. And it gave him an escape from his wife, because had he stayed at home, one of them would be in prison for the murder and the other one would have been buried. So it was an opportunity for him to do that. And the other thing that came of that is that he developed a relationship with another gentleman who later in his life was able to help him out in various healthcare issues. So there was something that was really beautiful about that. And one more thing about having a purpose. When you have a purpose in your life, you learn new things. You are expanding your brain, and that's a really healthy thing. And we may talk about that a little bit later, but it's like learning a new hobby, learning a new language. It's challenging your brain, and that's where that purpose comes in. So we covered G for goals. R is my way of talking about DNA, or your roots. And so DNA is really important. We're learning more and more about it all the time. And for me, there are 2 ways of looking at that. One is the person who has bad DNA, bad genes, who'd say, well, my parents had diabetes, they died in their 60s, and there's not much I can do about it. And I'd say, well, that's your DNA, and 20 to 25% of what happens to you in your life is genetic. But the other 75 to 80% is what you do in your lifestyle. So make adjustments to your lifestyle based on your DNA, your roots. The other is, if you have really good roots and really good DNA, flaunt it, take advantage of it, eat right, exercise, instead of living to 85, maybe live to 95 or 100. So those are a couple of things related to roots. Third letter is A for attitude. Now, attitude is, you want to have a positive attitude, but there's also the attitude of gratitude and being kind. And those are the things that I observed in my patients who had this better life. And research has shown more and more that when people express their gratitude, there's some release of neurotransmitters and hormones in our body that just are healthy for us. So we hear about people preaching that, but there's really a science behind it. So we've gone through GRAC. Stands for companionship. And I'll talk more about that as well as we go on. But we've discovered that having a companion, having a spouse, having people in your life also releases certain hormones. But there's also the opportunity for someone to say, hey, we live together, we're married, go to the doctor, you have a bad cough, or, I see that you're really in pain all the time. Go get it taken care of, because people who do have companionships live longer. It may seem counterintuitive at times if you have a nagging spouse, but having just someone in your life in that way has been shown to have an effect on how long you live. And finally, and it leads into other things, is the letter E in GRACE. I came up with that to stand for environment. What's going on in your environment? And I often show a picture of smokestacks and bad environment, and I show a picture of a beautiful stream in the country, and that's the outside environment, which is important because it's important for us to get out and be with nature and smell the roses, so to speak. And I make it a point to walk in my garden as frequently as I can. But the other part of environment is what's going on inside us. So it's how we eat, how we exercise, how we take care of ourselves. So that's what makes up about 2/3 of the book that I wrote. And I wrote some other stories in there. There are lots of stories about individuals to show as an example of where people can relate. But I have stories in my book about end of life and about hospice and about driving and a few other subjects that I think round out what I learned as a geriatrician.
Let's move on to the second book, The Power Five, before we get into these audience questions and really dive deep into these topics.
Sure. And as we do, Rob, I'll tell you that as I wrote my book, The Power of Five, I updated the name of my website too. And people can get to me through davidbernsteinmd.com, but also Power of Five, the number 5, life.com. Okay. So that's another way that people can get into my website. And I do that because I do a lot of work with my wife, who's an occupational therapist and a chef, so that we're able to work together. And I'll give a little plug to her because she posts recipes that are really healthy for people that conform to my Power of Five.
Yeah, I saw she had a cookbook on there also, but you can speak about that in a second.
So what happened was I had my Power of Five, and that was sort of a retrospective view of what I learned from people. And then basically I wrote the prequel. I wrote, what can people do proactively with intention to promote a longer life? Now, I wrote this, and since I wrote that, I've seen countless studies that conform or prove the things that I wrote about. And there's lots of research going on, and it all does correlate very favorably with what I wrote in my book. So there's a lot of real science behind it. And there are some people that are phenomenal going into the weeds about the mitochondria and the cells and biomarkers that conform to the things I'm going to talk about. So keeping things simple and staying with my number 5 as 5 things that people can remember, I made this one even easier because what I did was I came up with 5 things that all begin with the letter S that help people live a happy, healthier, longer life. And so my 5 S's, I'll say them fast and then I'll go into detail. Avoid sweets. That'll turn everybody off. Avoid stress. Get more sleep, sweat, and sex. And in my generation, maybe not so much yours, but my generation learned that sex sells. So Cosmopolitan would be in the grocery stores at checkout, and there would be something about sex in there, and that's why people bought it. So I figured I'd include the S for sex. But sex in my book is about sex. It's about intimacy, but it's also about socialization and companionship. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the opposite of that a little later. But so let's start with the first S, which is avoid sweets, avoid sugar. Sugar, carbohydrates, they're dangerous for our health, and they're found everywhere. Particularly, the other part of this is avoiding processed foods, because processed foods adds lots of sugar. There's all kinds of preservatives and things that will affect our health. And since we have an obesity epidemic in this country, and since people just aren't eating well, and major corporations that make food know the science, and they know how to get young people and old people addicted to sugar by putting just the right amount in there, and then they have a ready audience, and people are as addicted to sugar as they can be to alcohol, nicotine and other drugs. So people will be addicted to that sugar, and there's ways of avoiding that. But it's about how we eat and the way we eat. And my observations are that a Mediterranean diet is definitely the healthiest one for heart, for brain, for cancer. And so when I was doing my research, I wanted to link them all together. It's like the three things that occur most in my practice that lead to bad health are cancer, heart disease, and dementia, or I call it neurodegenerative disease because I'll include Parkinson's in there. So then I thought, what is a thread that holds that together? And the thread is inflammation. So sugar, sweets, carbohydrates creates this inflammatory process in our body, and that's what ages us more rapidly. And if we do it for a really long period of time, it creates frailty, and we eventually die because our body has had this chronic inflammation going on for such a long time. So that's why sweets was there, because it's really the most inflammatory food that you can put in your mouth. And by the way, my wife and I eat a Mediterranean diet. We took it one step further, and we eat a complete plant-based diet and have eliminated animal products altogether. There's a lot of data that supports that. But since there's so many people that need to make changes, I recommend taking it slowly and work toward a Mediterranean diet before you totally eliminate animal products. So that's the first S, stress. We all live in a very stressful society, and we can't seem to get away from it anymore. And just when things were bad, they got worse with COVID and the effect that COVID had on our population. But it was really well just known how bad stress has been on all of us. And there are only a couple of ways to deal with it. One is you can just quit, which means quit your job or quit your marriage or quit stressful situations, or learn how to mediate, avoid them. So, or mitigate them. And one of the ways to mitigate them is through mindfulness and relaxation and meditation. So there's been a swirl of information and opportunities with apps and learning about meditation and how we can do it. We just need to find time to incorporate it into our day. And it may be as little as 3 minutes or 5 minutes every day or 20 minutes twice a day. Research has shown that there's tremendous advantage and a tremendous anti-inflammatory effect by doing mindfulness and meditation. So that's the second S that I talk about. And then there are the things to get more of. So sweat is my euphemistic way of saying exercise. I had to use S's to get in there, but exercise is really what it is. And too many of us, and throughout my career, I'm guilty of sitting too long. And sitting is a health hazard. And as a physician, I would sit 8 or 10 hours a day. I would stand up as much as I could when I was with patients, but working on a computer and doing charts, there was a lot of sitting. And it's a hazard to our health. So what is the right amount of exercise and physical activity? Well, the government says in their studies that show getting as little as 30 minutes 5 days a week, that's 150 minutes, is a lower limit in the area where we'll get benefits. And we can take that up to 90 minutes 5 days a week or 450 minutes a week, where that's really the sweet spot. And above that, we don't really get any additional benefit, but there's a tremendous amount of benefit going from 0 to 450. And that exercise ought to be fun. It ought to provoke some sweat. It ought to provoke some shortness of breath, like going from aerobic exercise to anaerobic exercise, and that would be like high intensity training and strength training, things that would help our balance, like Tai Chi and yoga, and mixing it up, because it has to be fun. Because if you can't have fun during a given exercise, you're not going to want to go out and do it. And if you do it and do it really well, and do it to the point where you have release of endorphins, you're creating your own addiction to exercise. Now, my own personal experience, I've had many with exercise, is that I know that people can become addicted to drugs, and the addiction never goes away. But your addiction to exercise seems to last about 3 days. So if you exercise Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and you have your runner's high or exercise high, and then you take 4 or 5 days off, that addiction seems to wane. And one of the ways that people can do this is write it down on their calendar, have very definite times and very definite things that they can do to help help incorporate that exercise into their lives. So we've covered 3 of my 5 S's: avoid sweets, avoid stress, get more sleep, sweat, sleep, sweat, sleep. Sleep is the next one. And as a physician, I saw lots of people with sleep disorders. There were people with insomnia. And then toward the end of my career, I saw many people with sleep apnea. But if you group it all together, 30 or 40% of our population has a sleep problem at some point in time. And so even as a physician, my sleep was limited. I didn't have as good a habits. I didn't have as long a duration of sleep as one would need. And sleep, a life without sleep also creates inflammation. It also it also limits our ability to control our appetite and control our weight and control things like diabetes, because there are hormones that get balanced during sleep that become imbalanced when we don't get enough sleep. And it makes it hard to control our appetite. And therefore, we have difficulty controlling our weight. And then we have difficulty controlling our weight, then it's difficult to sleep. So people need to understand that there are ways of making adjustments to their sleep. I've been reading for a long period of time, and I listen to podcasts about sleep improvement, and we could talk a little bit about how to incorporate that. But it's incredibly important to recognize the importance of sleep. And then the last S in my formula is sex. So let's talk about sex, socialization, companionship, and intimacy, because that makes the world go round. And having relationships with people also has an anti-inflammatory effect. When we're alone, we do release cortisol, which is one of these hormones that has a negative impact on our lives. And so in the practice of my job, people were brought into my office. I didn't have to make appointments. I had my day filled with people. But once weekends came and I had fewer opportunities, I relied on my wife to establish relationships. And I made it my business, after doing my research, that I was going to incorporate more people into my life, make more friends, become more social. And I even tell my friends who I've done that with that I'm doing it for my own personal gain. That yes, we're going to be friends. It's going to be good for you, but it's also good for me. I'm taking care of my health by being more social. And we talked a little bit about the fact that sex is about intimacy, and the opposite of intimacy is loneliness. And I wrote about this from my research back in the late 2015, 2018, is about when I was writing my book. And it was really prevalent then. And that loneliness is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day or being overweight. So it's a health hazard, and it's pervasive in our society. The Surgeon General wrote about it in his private experiences as a private citizen, but also is now promoting it as a serious health hazard in this country. And COVID made it worse. COVID did a lot of things in terms of people's health, but also the social process of people becoming more isolated and not having that human one-on-one contact with one another. And it's been measurable.
Yeah, and I just want to tap on that and just put that exclamation point. Also, this generation of Z, I left college in 2012. That's when I finished my master's degree. You would walk down, this is in South Florida in Boca Raton. I would be walking straight outside. A woman, man, whoever it was, would be walking straight towards me. I'm making eye contact. and they look down at the phone. Then when they pass you, they look straight back up. So in a way, the social skills were already bad for a lot of people, not everyone. We were not going to, put too many people in the box, but for the majority, generalization, that group was already bad with the social skills. And now the loneliness aspect, the COVID aspect has even made it worse.
True. And I have my smartphone here too. And that's another thing that isolated us.
Correct.
Instead of being with someone and talking on the phone or having personal contact, people will message one another, and it's just not the same. And additionally toward that end, as a reminder, is that 50, 60, 100 years ago, when families got together, they would spend an entire day together.
Correct.
We'd go to my aunt and uncle's house in the afternoon. We'd hang around with our cousins. Our parents would socialize with one another and talk and do whatever they did. And then we'd have dinner together. Then we'd go home. So we'd have a whole day of doing that. And with estrangements in among families, about families having been spread out because there's air transportation and cars, and people can be far from one another. We don't have as much of that physical connection anymore. And all of the things that I talk about, my 5 S's, they have to be addressed, or they will benefit by addressing them with intention. They won't happen. Someone's not going to knock on your door every day and say, "Hey, I want to be your friend." Or, "Hey, I've just come to cook for you, and I shopped and I got you all this healthy food." Or, "I've just come to drag you out of the house and get your exercise." We have to take responsibility for ourselves, and these things, the 5 S's or grace, incorporated with intention.
All right, so we're going to jump right into these audience questions. Again, for people listening, and I just want to recap this for them. This is Dr. David Bernstein. You can go to either one of these 2 websites. It's davidbernsteinmd.com or power5life.com. I got that right, correct, Doc?
Correct. The number 5.
Yeah, number 5. Okay, so we're good to go. So let's jump right into this, because we did get a lot of feedback from people that when I said you were coming on, they did want to get these questions. But I want to ask my first question from what we just spoke about with the cell phones and a lot of people not having those social skills, which is, a detriment to their health. Is technology, but specifically social media, really crushing people's health? We look at Instagram and, like I said, I went to college in South Florida, Boca Raton. I'm still friends with a lot of females and males down there, but you go on Instagram and everybody's in a bikini or in a bathing suit. If you don't look like that, then you might have low self-esteem. And, also they don't speak about how the people on there use a lot of different aspects to change their bodies and how they look on those social media websites. But regardless of that, it's driving self-esteem, it's driving social skills down, leading towards depression, anxiety. All these tools are being thrown out the door because people are addicted to their cell phones and social media. Do you agree that's really targeting, loneliness and depression, anxiety, and all these other things like I do?
Yes. And you said a mouthful there, and I can dissect a little bit. I want to, I'm in the baby boom generation, so there are these different generations that followed me. And as a baby boomer, I'll look at many of those things you talked about as like, there were really negative things, and we did not have those in our generation. And our generation will have a longer life expectancy than generations after us. Gen Z, Gen X, millennials will have lower life expectancies than their parents, and life expectancies have gone down the last couple of years. And I'll explain that. I know that COVID has contributed to that, and the opioid epidemic has contributed to that. So there are some pretty significant things, but I think the life expectancies were going down, and life expectancies in other areas of the world, more developed countries like ours, see life expectancies longer than ours, despite what we spend in healthcare. So we spend a lot and we don't get as much for it. And that's why I wrote my Power of Five book, because people need to adopt changes because our healthcare system is not supporting that. The second thing that was really interesting that you said was about how people are addicted to this thing. So it's not only the social media part, and it's not only, or maybe it's integrated with the fact that we don't communicate face to face. We don't understand and read body language as well as we used to, because you can't read body language in a tweet and a text. You can't really communicate and do it in what I would consider a more proper way. But the other thing about it, and it goes, if you remember when I said something about sugar earlier, that people are addicted to sugar. Well, people are addicted not only to the phone, but they're addicted to likes. And it's all about the release of dopamine. Now I'm getting into the weeds and the neurobiology of things, but sugar, when we're addicted to sugar, we crave it, and we crave it because we get a dopamine release from that in our brain. It's a neurotransmitter. Well, when we get a like, or we get a book sale, or we get a compliment, there's a dopamine release from that as well. So
it's also, just to interrupt, it's also the text message, the bing, and people, you got to look right away and see who it is and stuff like that. So it is the social media, but like you said, it's the text message. It's more than just the social media, but go ahead.
And if you're watching television, it's the banner at the bottom of the screen. This is breaking news, and it's in red. Well, that's another thing that's really hazardous, because it distracts us from what we're doing. And there's this release of, oh my goodness, something's going on. Let's get a little cortisol out there. It's a stressful thing. And it's this negative downward spiral that we see. And technology is great. Look at all the wonderful things that we've accomplished in the last 20 and 30 years with technology. But some of those things, like how we're addicted to our phones, does set us back a bit, and it offsets some of the benefits that we've attained in science and technology.
There's somebody that's complaining, and I won't give out their name because they asked me not to, but there's someone that's complaining about medical school debt. And that is the reason why there's a lack of doctors in a lot of states. And also that why they're saying they've been to many different doctors and they're only getting seen for like 10 or 15 minutes. The doctor is not really giving them that time to voice their concerns of whatever it may be. I'm not in this person's head, but can you dive deep into that with, maybe doctors that people in your family, outside of your family, that are speaking to you about how this medical debt issue, as far as student medical debt, I should say, is a big problem? Because it seems to, saying what this person is saying in this question is that these doctors are now, it's like a mass production thing. We see this person for 10 minutes, we get that money off the insurance company, we move them out, give them a pill, and that's it.
Well, the person who is asking the question is very observant. I think medical debt comes into play in terms of a person's lack of desire or financial ability to structure their own practice and do it their way. And so they become employed physicians. And I've worked on both sides of that, and I saw the pros and cons of each. As an employed physician, I had a built-in human resource section and support for electronic medical records, which are prohibitively expensive, regardless of medical school debt. I think that's a total different issue, because the questioner really is saying what's going on in the office, and she's correct. In an employed medical setting, there's quotas or a number of patients to see to make it profitable all around, or to break even, or whatever it is. I know I felt that while I was in practice, and I retired 2 years ago because for a number of reasons, but I also felt that it was a strain on me, and the system has burned out physicians and healthcare workers, so that there's a shortage. and the shortage in physicians was projected for a while. There just weren't enough medical school seats, and then medical schools became expensive, and physicians are not, or they may have thought of themselves as the most intelligent and the highest, had the highest opportunities for getting a job that promoted their highest revenue. And being a physician is not the job that it was when I started 40 years ago. So there's the esteem associated with it. There's the burden placed on by debt and the burden placed on the number of patients. So physicians and, like I said, other healthcare workers are getting burned out and leaving. There's nursing shortages, and we can talk for an hour about healthcare shortages and caregiver shortages, which is a serious problem for us baby boomers because there won't be people to take care of us. But the question is right. Physicians are distracted by having to fill out grids in terms of health maintenance type stuff, and then get asked too many questions, and then there's not enough time. So it is a problem. And I get back to, I'll toot my own horn why I wrote The Power of Five, because you got to be able to take care of yourself.
Right.
Because we can rely on healthcare. Our system that we call healthcare is really a disease care system. It doesn't do a lot to promote health. And so we have to take that responsibility. And I've given people 5 ways of doing it. And by the way, I didn't include the simple ones, like don't drink and drive, don't overdrink, don't smoke cigarettes. Those are the ones that are no-brainers. The other thing that I'll throw in here is you get to a certain age, stay off ladders and don't go climbing on your roof, because only bad things will happen to you when you fall.
I know somebody that ended up heading into a nursing home because they went on their roof at 80 some odd years old, and that was the end of their life pretty much after that, a couple of years later. So yeah.
And it was pretty terrible time to live in a nursing home your last 2 years of your life, because you did something stupid by going up on a roof when you're in your 80s. But
100% agree. Last question. This goes into trust in the medical field. Are you seeing declining trust? This person talks about the declining trust in the medical field during COVID, during the opioid epidemic, which is still going on. Let's, get that clear. And also big pharma's hold on the medical industry in general and medical physicians.
We could do a whole hour on that discussion, that question. I think it's a confluence of things going on in society, and I think it's polarization. Some of it is polarization in society too. I can't help but say that I've lived my whole professional life, and before that, based on science and technology and research, and there's been strong data to support the things that I talked about today and the things that other health professionals talk about and promote. I'm going to take away the promote in terms of vaccines and things that would be healthy for us. There are lots of charlatans who promote their vitamins or their products that are based on a profit. There are things I see on television that promote memory, and they're not based on true science that goes on in the world. So it's some of it's a polarization, but people need to do their research, and I've done the research for them on 5 things, and they're 5 simple things. And if you keep things simple, you can do them. If you, I listened to a podcast, and the woman was great, make no mistake about it, but she talked about 13 things to do that will have you live longer. And it's like, how many balls can you juggle? I think you can juggle 5. If you try and juggle 13 and do all of them, it becomes difficult. And then you start questioning which is more important. I distilled it down to these 5 things that are important. I think it goes a long way.
Yeah, no, and we appreciate you coming on and speaking about this. I hope this is not the last time that we have you on, because you do bring a lot of valuable information. People need to hear these 5 things, but also hear everything else we spoke about today. Just take care of your health. Stop eating the garbage. Again, it's very easy. Sleep, eat correctly, Don't go to McDonald's, Burger King, and the list goes on and on. Watch your salt intake, eat your veggies, your fruits. I mean, this is common sense. I mean, if you're even people that are not educated, I think can get these things down pat. But anyways, we hope people get the book. Again, Dr. David Bernstein here on Fire Breathing Rob. Definitely go and check out the website, Power of Five, number five, Life, LIFE.com, or davidbernsteinmd.com. Anything else before we end, Doc?
Sure. A couple things. First, I really enjoyed our discussion today. It really is very stimulating. I hope your audience enjoyed it. I've made it even easier for people because I converted my Power of Five book into an online course. So that's available through my website too. And I'm just so proud of it. And I'll say one more thing about that process. I wrote a book. It provoked me to learn about publishing, learn about writing, and how to use my brain. I took a little bit of time off, and then I converted it to an online course, which was more brain power, building new circuits in my brain, reading a teleprompter, and being personable on screen and so forth. So whatever way that people can get the information and then incorporate it into their lives and use their brains, because the brain is something we need to take care of. And all of those things I talked about with you today will protect our hearts, will reduce our risk of cancer, especially the things you talk about with preservatives and pesticides and so forth. But also, those are things that will protect our brain. And dementia is a serious concern among my generation and millennials and Gen Z and X and so forth. But protect your brain, and these are ways to protect your brain and make it work better. So any of those things, any of those resources and recipes are available on my website. So thanks so much, Rob, for inviting me today and allowing me to share my thoughts with your audience.
Dr. David Bernstein, thanks again for your time. Appreciate you.